We've had a lot of talk in the past couple of days about essentially the Conservative Party no longer being the Conservative Party and indeed becoming, for all intents and purposes, the Libertarian Party, because that is what they are pursuing, this hardcore free market fundamentalism. Well, the whole idea is we don't care if the economy crashes because that's a good thing somehow. um, yeah, they actually generally do believe that crashing the economy will be good for the economy long term. Because as far as they are concerned, any company that cannot survive a crash, quite frankly, deserves it. And we saw during 2008 many companies go under, not because of they weren't prepared or just that they weren't ready for this type of thing. It's that these types of big financial crashes can have ripple effects throughout different industries. So you could have a crash in sort of as maybe what I might be expecting the housing market very soon, and that could ripple out and affect tons of different industries through no fault of their own. And remember, these are ultimately, at the end of the day, people's jobs. And we've talked about how 99.8% or something like that of the UK's entire business infrastructure is staffed by SMEs. And these are companies who have employees in the numbers ranging in between about 10 to 250, roughly. So, as you can see, these companies closing down can have a big knock-on effect. And you've already had the problems of the pandemic and Brexit weakening these companies to an almost breaking point. So if you get an intentional economic crash by Liz Truss and her free market fundamentalism, I think you are going to see a lot of business failures because they've already had to take two massive hits. One from the loss of trade in Brexit, and of course, from still very much recovering from the pandemic. So, another economic crash, unfortunately, I think is going to finish off a lot of companies, and that could mean a lot of job losses coming. So, before we go diving into this article, please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So, on we go over today's story on the Yorkshire Bylines. The title of Britain is now the laboratory for the Institute of Economic Affairs. Last Friday, Tim Montgomery, the right-wing political commentator and creator of the Conservative Home website, and along with Ian Duncan Smith, the founder for Centrals for Social Justice think tank, made an incredible announcement. He tweeted that Kwarteng's mini-budget was a massive moment for the Institute of Economic Affairs, that they have been incubating both Liz Truss and Kwarteng for years, and now Britain is their laboratory. So, assuming he's correct, what can we look forward to as subjects of this experiment? In 1955, using the fortune made as Britain's first battery-caged chicken farmer, Eton-educated Anthony Fisher established the IEA as a horrified response to the election of a Labour government and the first post-war politics of centrism and the regulation and the creation of welfare state. He went on to establish the Atlas Network in the US, which, as of 2017, works closely with over 500 similar, very right-wing think tanks in over 90 different countries. The IEA was specifically created to try and counter the post-war social democratic consensus thought through a redirection of the narrative. Their tactics are some of the outset have concentrated on the avoidance of scrutiny, and Fisher was advised by his then ally, Major Oliver Smedley, to give no indication as to their real agenda and to draft the aims of the IEA in, quote, rather cagey terms. Those tactics have not changed, and neither have their aims. The complete deregulation, and this obviously attracts a lot of interest from industries that are subject to significant regulations for the public good, such as tobacco, fossil fuels, arms, sugar, and construction. So fast forward to now. So in his tweet, Montgomery claims that Truss has been incubated by the IEA for years, and it is known that during this time she's been taken advised by several Tufton Street big hitters, one whom is Sharka Shingham, the IEA and trade fellow, and even formerly the director for international trade and competition. He was made her advisor on trade policy when she was the international trade secretary back in 2020, although mention of his IEA affiliation was removed from the press release announcing his appointment. Singham, a dual American national, was until 2012 a lobbyist in Washington, where he supported the Republican Mitt Romney's campaign against Barack Obama. He believed that the role of government should be strictly limited to protecting physical safety, private property, and economic liberty, and takes credit for Romney's personal proposal of prosperity zones. Sounds something very similar. And creating such zones is Singham's passion. Alongside political lobbying, Singham was also the managing director of competitiveness and enterprise development at the Babson Global, a role with working with enterprises and governments to establish the preconditions required to creating enterprise cities with regulatory autonomy for their host governments. Under Prime Minister Liz Truss, the government has just released plans for what some may consider to be these such preconditions. The creation of 38 new industrial investment zones across the country in which tax and planning regulations will be minimal. Alongside this, it is announced that it will retain EU inbuilt laws, which will allow for the bonfire of promised regulations by Truss in a recent leadership campaign. This has led to now an outcry from the nature and wildlife associations across the country, with the RSPCB issuing an unprecedented call to arms over the weekend as this legislation allows for potentially unfettered construction and the suspension of all rules to protect nature. It could also lead to a dramatic reduction in workers' rights, alongside the abolition of a 48-hour work week and agency workers' protection, paid annual leave, and part-time and fit-time workers' regulations. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, currently at the committee stage, expands and reforms the role of development corporations given to this private sector and the much increased role of the local authority function. Many of these roles previously handled by the central government will be transferred to a new model of local authority, the Combined County Authority. These CCAs can nominate private stakeholders and, quote, change their governance model to a stronger form by having a directly elected mayor. These zones can then amend the title of mayor to that of an American sounding governor or a country commissioner. These entities will have a range of powers, including the provisions for infrastructure such as water, electricity, gas, sewage, transport, and even health. They will also be able to issue compulsory land purchase orders. So, as you can see already, they are right. I think they are definitely right on the money that these enterprise zones are but the first stage to actually setting up these charter cities. And it should be something that we should be very, very worried about on this case. Make no mistake on that. So the Finance Bill of 2021 does allow for the creation for up to 10 free ports. Initially, these deregulated zones were restricted to a 45-kilometer outer boundary limit, but most freeport areas now seem to have expanded to include large areas of natural beauty and even national parks. Initially, these outer boundaries were described as merely administrative, but the government's own documents confirm that these wider freeport livers now include planning freedoms, which should be targeted within the freeport outer boundary. So, for example, New Forest, Dartmoor, and North Yorkshire Moors are also now areas with planning freedoms, and none of them were consulted. As you can see, we're getting to that point where it's now, yeah, these are starting to look more and more like charter cities. Another major factor in any potential IEA experiment would be achieving the almost total reduction in social spending to relinquish the role of the state in areas concerning welfare, healthcare, and benefits. All these post war provisions that Fisher so detested. Massive spending cuts are never popular, and attacking the NHS has often been equated to political suicide. Instead, Kwarteng's mini budget has slashed taxes and sent the pound into freefall. Grover Newquist is another right-wing libertarian and American political lobbyist. He's the founder of the Americans for Tax Reform. the broad member of the National Rifle Association and contributor to the IEA. He gave their 2013 Hake Memorial Lecture and writes papers and holders and webinars for them. Norquist is a proponent of the policy in the United States known as starving the beast. And economist Paul Krugman explains that the policy in these terms: instead of pushing through unpopular spending cuts, you slash taxes with the deliberate intention of worsening the government's fiscal position. Spending cuts can then be sold as necessary. In the current crashes, that's okay too. Tom Hardman, in his book The Undeclared War on the Middle Class and What Can We Do About It, writes it as this: crashing the currency is what they want. They want an economic crisis because they figure it is the only way they can force into a spending cut on social programs. It is the added benefit of making the British assets now cheaper for foreign investors as well. Truss has stated that time and time again she's prepared to be unpopular, so it seems to be prepared as perceived as incompetent too. But behind everything this government is doing is a forceful ideology that would transform Britain into a far colder, harder place where private entities have unprecedented control over public life and being overseen from afar by a Minister of State and a much reduced form of government. If the Bank of England interest rates and the Truss and Kwarteng double act may run into trouble, if the pound and dollar do reach parity, several Tory backbenchers have suggested this would indeed trigger letters to the 1922 committee. And until that time, the experiment goes on. And that is where we are. I think we will probably learn more about what is going to happen here sort of in November when Kwarteng has his sort of first chance to do his big autumn budget. We're already expecting the Office of Budget Responsibility to come back and, well, say, hey, Kwarteng's mini budget has blown a massive hole in the budget. But then again, you've seen it there, starving the beast. You don't want to do tax cuts, but if you starve the beast so much, then you can go, well, you see, now we have to cut some state spending. And I think this seems to be the very, very sneaky plan. And I think it is something that we do need to sort of bring up around this. I mean, the fact that the are very, very clear advisors in Truss's inner circle from this institute should be very, very worrying. And we should have huge concerns about what Truss will plan to do next. And the fact that she has already said that she intends to be unpopular is pretty much laying the groundwork for some of the stuff mentioned in this article to come. First of all, these enterprise zones definitely seem to be laying the groundwork for charter cities, but look in Honduras, where we talked about the absolute abject failure of that charter city over there. It just a complete and utter failure. And it's been closed down finally. But even then, they're looking at like potential problems over there. You've got the idea of basically just wanting to rip and tear apart our entire sort of social contract that we have with, like, social services, benefits, the NHS, basically just wanting to get rid of it completely. And that is something we really have to be aware of, because a government will never just go, yeah, we're taking it away, because they know if this Tory government made moves to just privatize the NHS, people would riot. I think there will be a full-scale revolution very, very quickly. But as you said there, the term "starve the beast." Well, then now we have to have tax cuts. Now we have to cut social spending, and crashing the economy may just be a deliberate attempt. And luckily, we are at a state where those types of radical free market fundamentalist libertarians in the Tory party are actually very, very few in number still. That's one thing that we can be thankful for. But we have to be careful that they just don't do so much damage. And hopefully those more moderate conservatives and those very, very alarmed by these essentially economic experiments will act in time to remove both Truss and Kwarteng from performing any more economic harm. And the Tories have signalled that this is what they will do. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page and a notification link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.